You must stay at home. Stay at home.
Hello and welcome to Lockdown, hosted by Steve Bomford with Mike Davis-Marks. Our armed forces operate in challenging environments. Week by week, we'll explore what we can learn from their experiences.
Steve, a female Tornado pilot, how exciting.
Very exciting, and she's quite a live wire. I think you'll agree after we've listened to this.
Perfect. Well, I can't wait. Let's listen.
Mandy, thank you so much for agreeing to come on the podcast.
My pleasure, Steve. It's lovely to be here.
It is. We're in interesting times, aren't we? We've just been talking about lockdown. So the day we're recording this is the day after restrictions have just been relaxed a little bit to meet some people. And I believe you've been out and about meeting some people and freezing yourself.
Yeah, we're getting quite hardy. And basically it's when you sort of get dressed up for a night out, but getting dressed up for a night out involves putting your thermals on. It's a slightly different connotation to normal.
It is. But nonetheless, things are changing for the better. Yeah. So I'd like to start with you sort of giving me a bit of insight into your military career, which is a little bit unusual, I believe.
Yeah. Well, it depends where you're coming from the military side, really. Yeah. So I spent 17 years in the RAF. I flew Tornado GR4s on the front line. And I held a variety of different roles as well in second line positions. I left the Air Force 10 years ago and set up my own business, basically taking all of my lessons from aviation out into businesses and schools as well. And I was the second woman that flew the Tornado on the front line. And so it's a nice to be able to use that as, as a really positive role model for youngsters.
For young women, I'd imagine, particularly.
Yeah, I mean, young women, but also I always say it's not just for the young girls, but also for young guys as well, because when I applied for the Air Force, I failed all the aptitude tests to be a pilot. And so I think it's just for anybody really that has that vision that they want to go somewhere, and then obviously you get obstacles that get put in your way, and if we're so set on this straight track, then you're often not going to get there. But it's about accepting that sometimes we need to take jinx and one door shuts, but how can we get there through a different channel?
So I'd like to go back to the beginning, really. What inspired you to take up fast jet flying?
My dad, my grandpa was a pilot in the Second World War, and so I'd grown up listening to his stories. And then I flew with air cadets from the age of 14. I joined those, and I loved the flying. And it always just seemed to me that it was the only thing I ever really aspired to actually achieve, was to fly fast jets. At the time, women weren't allowed to fly fast jets on the front line, so I did have in the back of my mind the police force. I've obviously got something about uniform. What can I say? Married to someone as well, so in the Navy. So, it's important to just, have this obsession with being in uniform or being close to them. And so, and then I went to university. And when I was at university, they changed the rules in my second year.
So the key to success is an obsession with uniforms. That's what I've just learned.
Yeah, absolutely. You've got to have these takeaways.
These takeaways. So you left the RAF 10 years ago and you set up your own business, as you said, about inspiring people to achieve their aims. How do you do that? What kind of stories do you tell? Have you got a good example you want to share?
Yeah, well, it's interesting, really. So when I first left, I made an assumption that I would join the airlines, because that's what most pilots tend to do. You tend to assume you've got a skill set, and then you think, how does that translate into the civilian world? And that's exactly what I did. I did all my commercial pilot's licenses, which was really tough. I had to do the whole lot of them, and I did them all when my children were 2 to 4 years old. Two of them 17 months apart, and I was working full-time in the RAF. So it was really tough. And I held this commercial pilot's license at the end, and I just thought, I have no desire to do that job. But it was that assumption in my own mind that I had to do what everyone else was doing as well. And it was only through a fortuitous conversation at a dinner party that, I was telling a story about flying over Iraq when we were engaged by a surface-to-air missile. And someone said, oh, my goodness, this would make a really good keynote speech. And I said, what? Because I've never even heard about that. And I think when you're in the forces, you obviously get, in great visibility to so many different roles and different jobs. But often it's, within that spectrum that you're looking at, you come out of the forces, and often it can be very overwhelming, and it's that transition that's very, very tricky for a lot of people. But sometimes it's just about recognizing how many skills that you have picked up that can be translated across. And so, yeah, that's what I ended up doing, just as a favor to someone initially. And then that led to an entire career in this. And yeah, and to give you examples, I basically talk around about my journey, about resilience and about not giving up on your dreams and your goals. And then lots of lovely stories about sort of the guys helping me get through flying training. And, you know, because I think so often we talk about a woman in a man's world, but actually I would say it's about being, you know, a person. And it doesn't matter what form of gender or cultural background someone comes from. The people I worked with were just incredible teams. And it was always the guys that supported me because, well, there weren't any other girls, but it wasn't, gender wasn't the issue. That wasn't why they were doing it. They were doing it because we were a really close-knit team. And that's something that I think you do get a lot of in the military, don't you?
You do. I'll tell you another word I hear a lot of is resilience, which you've just used. What does that mean for you, resilience?
I think it's an overused word a lot at the moment, whereby people are saying we need to be more resilient, you know, as individuals, but also maybe as organizations. And I think resilience has got to be linked to purpose, because I think it's very hard to be resilient when you don't know what you're bouncing back from. You know, what's the purpose? What are you doing? And so it's this feeling of, you know, if I don't have an end point or I don't have something I'm heading towards, then I can't really be resilient about it, because what's the point? So we need to have a point. And so I believe it's about not just bouncing back, pulling a spring so it doesn't break and all those sorts of things, but actually it's about heading back to somewhere that you want to go to. So it's all very well and good people saying at the moment, oh, we can't wait to get back to normal, whatever the normal is. But actually, that's not just resilience. It's about recognizing I want a new normal. I don't want to carry on working as I was before. You know, that's a level of resilience as well, and actually surviving and coming out the other side as stronger.
So is resilience part of change? Change part of resilience?
Yeah, I think it is. I do think it is. I think with resilience, though, you can't give anyone resilience. If I could gift something to my children, it would be two things: confidence and resilience. But you can't give them either of those two things. These are things that have to be built up. So, you know, I always say confidence is like a muscle. You know, we need to exercise it. We need to build that up. And that whole grit, determination, resilience, you can't gift it. Resilience comes, as does grit and all those good words, often from overcoming hardships. Well, actually, guess what? One thing that a lot of people are saying about, you know, the youngsters at the moment is, oh, they're going to be known as the COVID generation because they've had I was like, they're also going to be pretty resilient, because actually they've had to come up with new ways of learning. They've had to adapt to change quite quickly as well, constantly, with uncertainty. And, you know, when we haven't got certainty in the future, if we don't know what we're heading towards that goal, be it when is lockdown finishing, be it what date are we working to? We know we're working on data, but we've been given a date. You know, all of these things, when they constantly change, then actually it's very hard for the body to adapt to it. If you look at SAS training or, you know, special forces training, how do they break people? By changing the parameters. Yeah. You know, and it doesn't matter how resilient and how gritty someone is, when they say, oh, actually, you know, you've just climbed up this mountain. Well, actually, that's not the end. You're going to have to go down and come back up. And then people just go, I'm not interested, because they're trying to break them. And it comes from that constantly changing parameters. So, yeah, I think it's not just part of change. I think it's quite different from that as well. Okay.
You also mentioned another word that's quite close to our heart is purpose. That's not something you can teach, I would assume. You know, it's something. How do you find your purpose?
And I think this is really hard, and this is really difficult for youngsters. Well, for anybody. It was interesting because in lockdown, when the first lockdown happened last March, I built up a really successful business, and I was traveling all over the world, especially Europe and America. And I was really loving what I was doing. And then, of course, COVID hit and the events industry died a death, as did so many other different careers. And I sat there and I just felt really sorry for myself. And I thought, right, I dug deep. Basically, I wrote down all the words that were important. And guess which two words came up? Resilience and purpose. And I thought, right, I haven't got a purpose at the moment. And so I thought, right, what can you do? And something that we always had as a mantra as well in the military was this: control the controllables. And if you can't, let it go. So often we're consumed by worrying about all the superficial things, all the other extraneous factors that we have no control over. So it's about taking control of what you can do something about. And I thought, right, So I contacted my local hospital and I said, can I help out up there? And they said, actually, yes, you can. And in fact, no one else can see it, but you can, Steve. I've been volunteering this morning and I go up still and I fold the scrubs. I just launder all the scrubs for all the front line. And my husband and I have done it for a year. And it gave me a sense of purpose. Yes, I was volunteering, but I was giving something back. I was running towards the crisis, which always helped me. So that gave me purpose. And I'd had a book that I'd been writing and it had been going for 4 years and I hadn't finished it because I'm a massive procrastinator because I didn't really like writing. And so I thought, right, time to finish that project. So again, digging deep. I always say, find something that you really like doing. But writing was not what I really liked doing, but I felt it was a purpose. And, and I think this is where we've got such an issue at the moment with so many of our youngsters as they're coming through the system, is that they haven't had that exposure to different work experiences, different life experiences, that it's even harder for them to see, why am I revising for a GCSE when I have no purpose attached to that? It's hard.
So that must be relate to aspiration as well, because you do sort of see a lot of stuff, I guess, in the press where young people are aspiring to be a pop star or a YouTuber or something like that, which, yes, of course, is a very successful career, but it is for a very small number of people, isn't it? So I just wonder how we can raise aspiration or encourage young people to take up occupations that kind of challenge them in ways that they perhaps don't think they could do themselves.
Yeah, I think a lot of it's about creating strong role models. Again, there was a fantastic statistic. I do a lot of work for a charity called Inspiring the Future. And when I first started working for them, it was about creating strong female role models to go into schools. And they'd done this huge survey and it came out with this fact, which was 76% of girls will only go into careers where they have met somebody or have, a connection with somebody. And I thought, wow. Oh my goodness, well, how many of young people living in, I don't know, Harlow in Essex or wherever it was, have met a female fighter pilot? Well, the answer was 0. So actually it's about creating role models in any field at all. I'm not talking just the military, or just for young people, but having exposure to that, to realize that, hold on a minute, this is exciting. This is something I could do. And realizing that you don't have to have, be an Oxford or, Cambridge graduate. I was just a girl that grew up in Manchester, a very, very normal person. And so long as you've got something inside you that says, I do aspire to achieve something, and I have always had that drive. I think even as a really young girl, I always had aspirations. And I'm going to quote my school motto, only my best is good enough for me. And it actually has really stuck with me the whole of my life, because everything I do, I try to do it to the best of my abilities. So I aspire to achieve. And that is one of my driving factors.
So who was your role model? Who did you meet that inspired you?
Well, it was no one in the Air Force, really, because there weren't any female role models particularly, but it's people I've met. My parents were both really strong role models. They split up when I was very young, but for different reasons. So my dad, incredibly resilient, built himself up, his business up, and, he's had struggles along the way and then gets knocked down and he comes back every time. And my mum brought up these 2 young girls, again, her sort of definition of, if it's going to be someone, why shouldn't it be you? And, if we wanted to go on holiday to France in the caravan, she towed it there. She didn't go, oh, what happens if we break down? What happens if this? She just said, right, we'll go. That's fine. Which must have been really quite daunting with these 2 young girls going, oh, we're nearly there constantly in the back. But there was nothing that she thought that she couldn't achieve. And my sister is an incredible role model. She wanted to become a doctor. She's now a medical director of a hospice. And she was told at school she didn't have the grades and she needed to aim for nursing. And she said, I don't want to be a nurse as it happens. I want to be a doctor. And she said, I'll show you. Please just give me the opportunity and I'll show you I can do it. And she did. And so again, I've been surrounded by people from a very, very early stage of my life where people, basically, it wasn't going to be easy, but they did it anyway.
Yeah. That's interesting, isn't it? Because you're talking a lot about family members there, aren't you, as well?
Yeah, no, and I think it's so often that we need. I look at all these, youngsters that post all these photos themselves constantly on all the different social media platforms, with their pouting lips and, pushing themselves up and all of this sort of thing. And I just think, guys, it's not about this. Put the photo on with no makeup on. Have you eating cake. Live your life. Let's see the real people. And I think we've so often had these role models for the younger people who aspire to be this fake persona, and yet actually we need people that are real people doing real stuff out there, and there are lots of them around, but often we don't have to look that far away. I say that, and then I've got 2 teenage boys that are not interested in anything that I've done or their dad's done. So it's sometimes, if it's too close, you can't see the wood from the tree. So they don't see me or my husband as being inspirational at all, even though I'm paid money. I go and speak to schools and organizations and I motivate them. My sons listen to nothing. So yeah, it's too close to home.
He would never tell his mum and dad anyway, would he?
No, we wouldn't. No.
Never tell your parents they're great. Heavens. So you touched on technology there. What do you think the impact, obviously in a negative way, I suppose, but what do you think the impact of technology is on things like, resilience, purpose?
I think we're going to have this massive, we're already seeing it now, huge mental health problems that are coming from this isolation that we're getting from it. And also this constant fear of missing out, constantly seeing everyone else having a great time. We never post the photos of us going, gosh, 4th day of doing absolutely nothing and bored senseless. Because that is not human nature, but you do post it on a walk or, yeah, this is me living in the outside, having a good time, and that's just the way that we are. And I think you've got things like Snapchat, which have these maps where you can even see where groups of people are now meeting, and all you're looking at is all your friends are meeting in one place and you weren't invited. And this is going to have awful effects on people's mental health in the future. The flip side of that has been gaming, and it's been interesting because I always saw gaming as being quite a negative thing. And then in the last year, with 2 teenage boys, if they hadn't had gaming, I think I would have seen serious problems with both my children, because actually, as young men, they find it difficult to ring a friend. They just don't tend to do it. Whereas they're going on a game and there's 6, 7, 8 of them all in a game together, and I hear them laughing and hollering at each other and screeching and cheering and bantering, and I think, gosh, that's like as an adult going for a walk with a friend. You're doing a joint activity, but the focus is not on chatting to each other. And it's why you end up having the best conversations ever when you're out walking, because you're not looking at each other. The conversation tends to flow so much better.
Do you know, I read something quite recently about that in terms of how men, and therefore boys, will bond by doing an activity, whether that's going to the cinema, going to the pub, playing football or a football match, whereas women will do it more naturally just by going for a walk. Not that going for a walk's not an activity, but it's going to be a very specific, like, let's go and do this. They won't, as you've just described, just pick up the phone saying, I'm feeling a bit rubbish today. Should we just have a chat, whatever?
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I think I've noticed it with different friends that have got girls, and they've struggled a bit more bizarrely in lockdown, the young girls have, because again, you have to make an effort to ring a friend, and then what happens if the friend doesn't want to talk to me, and all the insecurity that comes with that, whereas boys just go, who's gaming? Great. And they all just do it. And so there has been a much more sort of camaraderie, I think, that we've seen. I'm not saying that girls don't game, of course, I'm not saying that, but predominantly you see more boys gaming.
So looking forward, what do you think the kind of effects longer term of COVID will be, or this experience we've been through over the 12 months, particularly in terms of young people and their aspirations and career prospects?
I think it's going to be very, very interesting. I think so for myself, I'm on the extrovert scale. I'm probably as far right as an extrovert comes. And even on Thursday, we were meeting up with my 6 girlfriends. We're in a book club thing, and we said, let's meet up in someone's garden. I felt really nervous. And I was like, oh gosh. And I thought, if I'm feeling like that, then what would someone that's a little bit more introverted be feeling like? And I've had lots that I've been doing in lockdown as well, sort of work-wise, walking, cycling, I've kept myself really busy. And I thought, gosh, if I had not been doing so much, if I was feeling a little bit underconfident, then this would become a real problem. And I think we're going to see real issues in this integration back into society, whereby, there will be huge confidence issues and, whole feelings of, inferiority and, am I good enough? And I think, especially for young people, they basically, my son's GCSE year this year, and the last 2 years of school he hasn't been in, so I know COVID has only been around for just over a year, but because they were only in school for one term in that first year, and then really one term so far in the second year, actually they haven't done any of the social building that they would normally do, of going to parties, of having a kiss, of none of that. So actually the only people that my son has spoken to really has probably been boys, and none of that development, social development, has happened. And so I think we'll see that boys are happy in boys' company and girls are happy in girls, but there might be huge problems when we've got the sort of the mixing.
Really interested by that anxiety you talk about meeting up, your own personal experience. I wonder, did you talk about that with your friends?
Yeah, I did. I said I was feeling really nervous about it. I think one of the things for myself was I'd actually given up alcohol as well. So I'd been really focused on, so I thought, right, I'm going to come out of lockdown slimmer, healthier, all the rest of it. So I'd lost 2 stone in weight. I hadn't had a drink that year. So since literally 1st of January, I stopped drinking. And, I'd done no sugars, no carbs. And of course we were going out, and I thought in my own mind, right, I will be drinking again. And so I was really worried I was going to get drunk. And I was like, I don't want to get drunk. Oh gosh, I've been so good. So, so I was sort of worried about that as well, actually. And, and of course I didn't need to worry about it, but, I just had lots and lots of water, and I did have, a few drinks, but I certainly didn't get drunk. And that was a really good thing, but I was concerned about that. And I think, we have seen people, we went out on Thursday night, and then I went out with my husband to some friends on Friday night, which was, to someone's garden. Then on Saturday, we had a night off. I was like, oh, thank goodness we can have a night in front of the fire and put our gym jams on again. It was almost like 2 nights on the trot is enough, So, yeah, it's interesting.
So we've been conditioned.
Yeah, I do. I think, but we have been conditioned, but we've also seen 3 months is long enough to see actual habits forming. Those whole neural pathways, have created different ones. And, I was almost disappointed when the sun started, when we started getting lighter evenings. So I was like, oh my goodness, I'm going to have to delay when I have my bath and I can get the fire on. Whereas normally I'm there down at the tennis club and I'm excited about that. And, oh, fantastic, it's light evenings. Now I can play tennis into the evenings. And I was thinking, oh no, this is going to stop me from watching the next box set and getting the fire going. So yeah, I think new pathways have formed. I think new habits have been formed as well.
Do because what you're making me think of is that obviously the clocks have changed, as you just talked about, isn't it? And it's lighter in the evenings. And I was very struck by during lockdown, when we were all locked down properly, the first lockdown was incredibly strict, as you remember. And I remember sort of like being indoors, obviously a lot, but it was very sunny, wasn't it? Very early as well last year. And when the clocks changed, I felt like I'd been transported back in time to the main lockdown. I felt like I had this weird feeling that I couldn't and shouldn't go out at all, even though we are able to do so.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things are going through people's minds at the moment. And, it was interesting because, of course, there's festivals that are going to be happening, and it's like, shall we book something? And I was thinking, shall we? How is that even going to work, being with other humans in such close proximity? I did book Carfest, I have to say, because I do love that one. And, it's a great event to go to. And it was nice to have something in the diary to look forward to. But I did feel genuinely again, sort of like, oh, gosh, I'm not sure how this is going to work, being so close to so many people. Yeah.
Yeah, that must be. I guess young people have been back in schools, though, haven't they? Albeit not for that long now, but they also were prior as well. So I guess that may be a bit different for them. I don't know.
Yeah, I think, well, I have friends, and lots of the people I'm speaking to, youngsters, are having anxiety issues in some way, shape or form. So, I tend to think, I always think, oh gosh, my children are this. But then actually I hear other people, I think, well, at least they're still happy. I think they might be screaming at me and not that happy at that moment, but at least they, they're still talking to me. At least there's, still a level of communication, be it positive or negative.
So assuming things go all right with Boris's roadmap, but who knows, but assuming they are, what kind of advice or guidance would you give to young people to sort of rise to that challenge, I suppose, of going back out into the outside world?
Yeah, so I think as soon as I got something in my diary, it literally lifted me. So I think so youngsters don't like to plan. Okay, so I'll say to my son, I'll say, why don't you look if you can get a weekend away, with your friend? He said, don't tell me to plan something, because they don't want to have something to plan, because what happens if then others reject them or say they don't want to do it, then they feel foolish. So it's trying to have something to look forward to, but without that being a burden on them. So I've just booked a week away down in Devon, after my son's GCSEs have finished and he's finished school. And I sort of said, would you like to bring, a couple of friends? And he sort of went, oh, I'll ask them, and that suddenly he went, and he was then quite excited about that one, because that was me organising it, but it wasn't him and possible rejection again. So it's just a balancing thing. So I think that the whole aspect for me is trying to get things to look forward to realise that, things like proms have been cancelled, events have been cancelled, people's weddings have been cancelled. Just get something in the diary, because people are not wanting to put something in the diary in case things get cancelled again. And yet when we don't do that, we don't have anything to look forward to. So get something in the diary, but get insurance in case, and I certainly wouldn't be recommending overseas trips, but, something local would work.
So I think that's fair to say that advice would apply to adults as well, wouldn't it? I think.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, literally, the second I got Salcombe booked, my heart was singing. And I thought, I've got something in my diary to look forward to. Even if it's booking a favourite restaurant, get in there now, just get that one night in the diary to look forward to after the 17th of May, because, it's really important.
Yeah, I must admit, I find that to be very good advice, because it's so easy just to look at the sort of timeline thinking it's never actually going to happen, is it? And I just think that can be so frustrating, the fact that, and also, for many people that have been shielding or may still, have quite serious medical conditions, the I don't know if the word is courage or not, but the sort of confidence to take the leap and go outside. It's not going to be an easy thing for an awful lot of people, is it?
No, it's not. And especially if you consider someone that has been shielding, this is a long time to be in your home for. And actually, what is therefore going through your mind, it's phenomenal, really. And if you think for the elderly as well, they haven't perhaps been using things like FaceTime and different social media platforms. And fortunately, I got my mum onto FaceTime really early on, and we got, an iPad to her so that we could do FaceTime. And she just said, this has changed the whole year for me, because we ring what we always speak every night, whether I'm cooking a tea and she's there, she's in the kitchen with me and we're laughing and the kids are walking through, oh, hi, Granny, she's like, oh, hi there, oh, gosh, you're looking tall, and all of this. But there's a sense of connection there that you don't get from the telephone. And so, actually having those things, I think, have made a monumental difference. But I think, if you've been shielding alone and potentially not with different platforms like that, then it must have been really, really hard.
That's a good example of the positive impact of technology, isn't it? I think that's kept a lot of people connected. I know from our point of view, we were meant to be running lots of workshops, face-to-face activity, all had to stop, and we just moved everything digitally. And we've been genuinely surprised at the number of people that have got involved digitally. And I think what COVID has done is enforced technology upon us, forced technology upon us. And so suddenly everyone's, the knowledge and understanding is far greater than it would have been 12 months ago.
Yeah, and I think that has been, it certainly was a real positive in my, in the speaking sort of sector, because of course people suddenly realised that they were going to have to do something for their teams, be it, we called it sort of like a leadership bite sort of thing, or bite-sized buzz, where I came into meetings, even if it was for half an hour, and, just talked about something that was different to their normal working routines. And it has made a big difference. And I've now my work potential's massively improved because I've now been speaking to Australia and America loads. And, whereas you couldn't have said, oh, let me speak to a school in Australia. I'd have said, look, it's just not going to work. And it wouldn't have been an accepted medium to say, but why don't we do it on a virtual platform? They'd have gone, really? I don't think so. But because it's normalized it, I think this will change. I think hopefully we'll get into this blended scenario whereby some things that have been working really well on different platforms like Zoom and Teams will continue to do so, and yet hopefully we will start to emerge back into having some sort of face-to-face meetings as well.
I agree. I mean, I must admit, it's made us a lot more efficient with our time.
Oh yeah, I mean, the other day I went up to London to do a speech and to a studio, and it was an 8-hour round trip. And I thought, I could have nipped upstairs, done it in an hour and nipped back. I'd have been, downstairs 2 minutes after doing it. And I sort of thought, actually, I quite like that. And so, I thought, gosh, this is interesting, Mandy. You've gone through a bit of a change here, because I thought I'd have been really excited about going into London. And ironically, I then wasn't. I thought, yeah, there's this, what is become so much easier to do. There's got to be a balance.
And possibly with some underlying anxieties are there as well about the travel and meeting people you don't know. So maybe that's part of it.
Yeah, I mean, that didn't really bother me particularly on that front. I mean, I've been up once before, and actually there was no one on my train, no one on my entire carriage with me. And then on the tube, I was in a carriage by myself, and it was 5:00. It was rush hour. I was the only person standing on the platform, and it felt like there'd been an apocalypse. And this was only last month. So, relatively recently. And so there wasn't so much anxiety around that. It was more just the ease. And I wouldn't say laziness, because I'm certainly not a lazy person, but just the simplicity of nipping upstairs, doing a session online, and then being off again. And as you say, so much better, for your time management, I could have squeezed in a bike ride and a Pilates session, for goodness sake. How middle class does that sound?
And I bet you didn't go there in your hospital T-shirt.
I did not have my hospital T-shirt on, my volunteers hospital T-shirt. I had to put makeup on and high heels and everything.
Oh, that's a whole nother podcast, that is, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
So one last question. COVID has shined a light into lots of different parts of society, some good, some bad. What do you think the lasting legacy will be in terms of what COVID has, the light it's shined on different parts of society?
I think it's made us appreciate freedom. It's made us appreciate the smaller things like neighbours, and the support I've had around here from my neighbours. I mean, I got COVID very early on. I had one neighbour I'd never spoken to, and I looked outside and she said, "Pizza for you." She'd made this beautiful pizza, because we weren't allowed out the house. We were literally locked in, the four of us. And there's this fantastic, delicious homemade pizza, which was bubbling from the oven. I was like, oh my goodness, small things have made monumental differences. And we've often said it can be the small things that can be really appreciated. But I think it's made us appreciate those things even more and feel gratitude. And it's something that I have really started religiously practicing in the morning, is to feel gratitude for what I have in my life. It doesn't cost any money to think, I'm grateful I live where I do, that I have actually a lovely walk that I can do, every morning. The small thing, I'm grateful that actually we're all healthy at the moment. And once you do those, and I climbed up Kilimanjaro about 1.5 years ago, and I had this really wacky hat, and I've put it on this ornament thing just in my bathroom. So when I'm brushing my teeth, I see it every morning, and I think, I am grateful that I had that opportunity and then met the friends I did, and this wonderful support network from that. And so again, all these little spurring things fill you with gratitude, and they actually change sort of the way that our balance and our energy works. So yeah, the lasting legacy for me would be to find pleasure in the small things, to be humble, to appreciate the freedom that we have, and therefore how that has felt when it was taken away from us. That would be that for me.
And you don't need to have flown a tornado to appreciate those things, do you? You
don't. No, absolutely not.
So, Mandy, I would just like to say thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
My pleasure. Thanks so much, Steve. Thank you for inviting me in.
Wow, Mike, that's a lot in a very short space of time. What an inspirational lady.
Yeah, I mean, as I understand it, she's the second female fighter pilot the RAF have had, and obviously there are now more in the pipeline. But 17 years flying Tornado GR4s. How good is that?
What a job. You told me the other day you can fly too. Have you ever had a go on a jet?
I've been in the back of a jet and not liked it very much, actually. No, I'm afraid my flying days are mostly over, and they were limited to the single prop PPL type. I just thought it would be fun as a submariner to be up in the air occasionally, but there you go. I think for the benefit of listeners, Mandy talked about flying a Tornado GR4. So people might not know what a GR4 is, but it's the bomber kind, as opposed to the air-to-air combat kind, which is an F3. So a Tornado GR4, often known as mud movers, drop precision bombs of sorts and missiles.
Why are they known as mud movers?
Because they move mud. Isn't that obvious? We always like to joke about the RAF missing their targets and moving a lot of mud. But of course, these days they're very precision guided and invariably hit the target. So it's probably just
good luck saying that to her face to face. But anyway, that's for another time.
I mean, after this interview and commentary between you and I probably hope I won't meet her. But no, that's completely wrong. She's a very impressive person.
Yeah.
And I thought actually, I mean, you didn't speak that much about her time in the RAF, although because a lot of it was about what she's done since then, and particularly what's happened more recently. There were lots in that. She talked about, actually, she's now known as a keynote speaker, but she hadn't left the RAF to become a keynote speaker. It was simply spinning a dit, in Navy terms, over a dinner party about how she was flying over Iraq and avoiding surface-to-air missiles. That someone said, "Would you come and do a keynote speech? I think you're really good at that." And that was the first time she'd even thought about it. And now she's kind of made a career out of it.
Yes, and quite a career. But, she was going to be an airline pilot and decided that wasn't for her as well, didn't she?
Yeah, she actually said she went through all the rigmarole of doing her commercial pilot's license, which I know is quite a lot of hours and things like that. But she didn't have that passion for it. She spoke about, having a family, young family, then boys of 2 and 4, but not really wanting to do it. And I suppose this dinner party happened at the right time, in the right place to sort of, switch track into something that she was much more passionate. And you can hear that passion. When she speaks, you can hear that passion.
Definitely. I mean, Rachel first encountered her while she was on a meeting, I think to do with Operation Courage, or certainly an NHS meeting in relation to veterans. And she was very much inspired, said, "You've got to get this lady onto the podcast." So she certainly impressed Rachel.
Yeah, and she really impressed me too. I remember hearing her for the first time as a keynote speaker at an Armed Forces Covenant event in London. And she really stood out then. So, very impressive person.
Very impressive indeed. And an inspiration for young women as well, although she's not specifically focused on that. I thought that was really cool that she was getting involved in that.
Well, she was talking about being role models and the fact that she was a female fighter pilot, and when most females don't think about. Interesting statistics she came up with. 76% of girls only go into careers where they have a connection. 76, that's 3/4. I mean, you can't fault my maths, can you? That's incredible, isn't it? So only 24% will venture into a career where they have no connection or no link or anything.
And I wonder what inspires them to do that, though. I wonder why it has to be a link. Is that?
We'll have to get an expert on to explain that, because I'm certainly can't. But Steve, I think the 2 words really came across loud during her interview with you. Words that we've heard before, but I thought she really spoke about them with great authority, and they were resilience and purpose. And she links the 2 very strongly. She said it's quite difficult to have resilience without purpose. You need to have something that a reason for doing something or being something in order to build up the resilience necessary to, keep going when times get tough. So I thought that was a really interesting part of the interview.
I would agree. And as you know, a few of our previous guests have mentioned this in a very similar way, haven't they? It's quite interesting how this link seems to be coming out as the theme, but not just for people who are experiencing really difficult challenges. You know, if we're thinking of Pete Reed, I mean, you can see his previous training and what have you as an athlete. He has learned skills there, but resilience and purpose in perhaps a more everyday life or everyday examples, perhaps.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting. She talked about you can't gift resilience. She said, if I could gift my two teenage sons anything, it would be resilience and confidence. But you can't gift it. You have to build them up. And sometimes you have to build them up the hard way. Interestingly, she made a comment slightly later on in the interview about, what have young people, perhaps learnt through COVID, and it could be that they've built up some resilience as a part of being isolated in a way they're not used to. And they now have strategies for dealing with it, which they wouldn't have done had they, things been normal. Well, there never will be a normal as we know it, I don't think, for some time to come at least anyway.
So is resilience related to experience? Is that what we're saying?
Good question. I think you can build up. I think you need to experience things in order to build up resilience. But experience sometimes can mean doing something for a long time. And actually, maybe sometimes just doing it once will give you an element of resilience in doing that. And certainly, so I don't think experience needs to mean doing it lots and lots of times, but I think it means having experienced it, you're better prepared in the future.
That's a good explanation. Well done.
Well, it kind of goes back to my submarine training, which is when, the chances of, there being a fire on board a submarine or a flood or things are very, very remote. But we practice and rehearse it so that if that remote chance does happen, we can deal with it almost in autopilot because we've built up the experience and the resilience to know what to do in adverse conditions. So I completely understand how experiencing things will help build experience, and you've got to sometimes learn it the hard way and make mistakes. Preferably in a safe environment, an environment that allows you to make mistakes, and you learn from those mistakes so that you don't do it in the future.
Yeah, that reminds me of Hugo and capsizing and how they prepared for that, trained for that eventuality. That's the submariner in him, I suspect.
Yeah, he just wanted to be underwater. He probably planned it into the crossing. I don't know.
Just couldn't help himself.
Indeed. Another nice saying that she came out with is control the controllables. And I've heard that in various guys. Worry about what you can change. Don't worry about what you can't change, and have the gift of knowing the difference between the two. So control the controllables. So she was talking about, we can't control, what's been thrust upon us from COVID, but and her whole event diary went out the window as a result of that. But she then decided to go and volunteer for the NHS, folding and laundering scrubs, which gave her purpose, she said. And she picked up that book she's always been meaning to write and got on with it, and that gave her purpose. So I thought that control the controllables was quite insightful.
And how circumstances can change things for you as well, and it's not always a bad thing.
One thing I really did feel a strong connection with her was when she started talking about her teenage sons, because as you know, I've got a pair of teenage sons, Harry and George, 19 and 18 respectively. Just about everything she said about them, I felt, yeah, that's true here, that's true here. But she was also quite interesting on the gaming side. And I don't know whether this applies to girls as much as boys, but certainly from here, there are frequent bouts of playing on Xbox, etc. Other types of entertainment are available, and actually they do talk and chat and laugh and scream and shout. Sometimes shout too much with all their friends. But they're enjoying themselves, and so in that respect, I think having hated gaming, I now think it's actually providing them with some, connection with people they can't see otherwise.
Yeah, I'd agree. I was very surprised that she brought that up. I wasn't expecting it at all, but it's a really interesting point. And I'd be interesting to know how many girls are involved in gaming, because the whole gaming market, the whole gaming industry has exploded throughout lockdown, whether it's games on your phones or, as you say, PlayStations or Xboxes or what have you. So that's quite an interesting development in the pandemic, isn't it?
It is. You did sort of ask what she had got out of COVID, and she was talking about how much it's made her appreciate freedom. Her neighbours, she admitted to having COVID early on in this strange year that we've just had, and how one of her neighbours brought round a home cooked pizza, which I'd caught COVID now. No, actually, I don't.
You don't want me to bring round one of my pizzas, I can tell you.
Well, I've never seen one of your pizzas, but I can imagine what it would be like.
Quite.
And taking pleasure in the small things and things like that, being humble and appreciating it. And I think that's, I think there's a certain amount of that. Not COVID isn't all bad. There's a lot of bad that's happened, but there's also some good that's come out of it. And the sense of community that we saw, particularly in the early lockdown, where people rallied round and helped each other, I think was quite palpable. And one of the things I hope that will stay with us after COVID has become, a distant memory, is that sense of community. I fear it won't, but I hope it will.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. But I think people might be carrying a bit more of the benefits, if you like, this community spirit than perhaps we at first realise. It's when people start talking about it that they recognise that actually there has been some positive aspects to this, unbelievably.
I'm sure you're right, but I'm still waiting for that pizza to be delivered. The one final thing, which I thought was quite good, was, she was talking about isolation, and we've talked about isolation, and particularly for our elder population, but how technology has helped bridge some of that. Those that have been able to access technology, even, relatively simple technology, the ability to FaceTime or Zoom or whatever, your loved ones has become much more normalized in a way that it wasn't before March last year. And she was talking about the future being potentially a blended experience of normal face-to-face and still keeping up a lot of, technical connections for people that perhaps live far away or you don't see very often. So I thought that was a very interesting insight as well.
Yes, a kind of hybrid world. Interestingly, I mean, we often talk about it in terms of Zoom or Teams or some platform like that. But I think interestingly, that's also gaming, isn't it, for younger people? They're not going to spend as much time perhaps on Zoom, but they're interacting through various, online platforms such as gaming.
Yeah, I think that's exactly. You and I would have a FaceTime or a Zoom to talk about this and that. They get on Xbox to go and fight the baddies and talk about life, the universe, and everything. I think that's absolutely right.
Should we get our Xboxes? Should we get an Xbox?
I have to admit, I had a go on my son's. He persuaded me to have a go on Call of Duty or something like that. He said it was the easiest game he had, a cheeky chap. And I completely failed about 15 times before I gave up. So there's definitely skill in what they do. I don't deny that.
So the hand-to-eye coordination is not quite what it was when you were flying your light aircraft, I'm guessing.
It's a different sort of hand-to-eye coordination.
Oh, is it?
I was never a great cricketer, that's for sure.
Okay. So I'm just wondering if there's a pizza delivery game.
Well, if there isn't, perhaps we should invent one.
Yeah, I think we should. And I could try it out on you and see what your skills are like.
At eating it, I'd be very good, I can assure you that.
Yeah, I can see that.
Thankfully, your listeners can't.
That was great, Mike, as ever. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thanks for listening. The Royal Navy and Royal Marines charity exists to support sailors, Marines and their families for life. If you or someone you know could do with some support, give them a call on 023 93 87 1568 or drop them an email on support@rnrmc.org.uk. If you enjoyed this podcast and want to hear more, please subscribe.